Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to show you how I made this animation from storyboarding all the way to compositing and adding sound effects. I'll put any links to software, templates and tutorials I mention in the description, along with the full collab once it's been released. So the brief for this collaboration was pretty open. Our only requirements were that it was 8 seconds long, included the YouTube play button as a cushion somewhere in the scene, and either started or ended in a room which we could transition or move out of during the 8 seconds. My initial idea for this was that my character would work at the desk and get pulled through the tablet into this strange tunnel or surreal world where the camera would start close and then pull back, showing coloured blobs and looping animations. I'm a big fan of anything weird or surreal, and if I can throw in a smear or glitch, I'll do that. I'd originally planned for the transition to distort the background and swipe across the page, but after several tests it didn't look right and I switched to a scratchy texture that would flow in from the sides and the reverse to reveal the second scene. For this project I made a colour script to plan how the animation would look and decide on the palettes I'd use. I'd copy over my storyboards to a template and block out the values in grayscale. Though I could increase the size of the panels to add more detail, I prefer this to be a quick process where I don't get caught up in the details. There are 2 light sources for this first scene, the window, which will be a warm yellow, and the tablet and PC monitor screens, which have a cold blue light. In the second scene, the light source is behind the character, which means anything close to the character will be lighter, while anything further away or closer to the camera will be darker to give depth to the scene. With each project I work on, I'll save colours and palettes to a custom panel to use later, and sometimes generate palettes from the colours website if I'm stuck. I'll think about the mood of the scene or shot, and how the character is feeling, or how I want the viewer to feel while they watch. Some colours will have different meanings that will change depending on how you use them. Green can represent nature or healing, but also jealousy and greed. With each scene, I'll use a flat colour to lay on top of the grayscale, setting the layer mode to overlay. Yellow and blue would be the dominant colours in this first scene as a contrast of warm and cool, outside versus inside, while I wanted the second scene to overall be much more warmer with pinks and purples. In the first scene, I softened the contrast of the base colours by adding smaller highlights and shadows to each of the panels. I'll often flick through the blending modes of each new colour to find one I like. With this orange, I used Add to give a nice warm evening light over the window. It also worked well in the cooler colour palette areas. In the second scene, a warm purple set to overlay gave depth to the edges of the panel, while a bright yellow, again set to overlay, warmed and brightened the centre. Using light and shadow is a great way to draw the viewer's attention and direct it to the points you want them to focus on. You can also increase the saturation or use of a colour during your animation to add intensity to your scenes. The opposite can also help. For example, slowly removing colour from your animation till it's grayscale, except for one colour that becomes the focus of the shot or scene. To make sure I can accurately colour pick when it comes to making the backgrounds, I'll rename the layers with the opacity level and blending mode, so if I need to switch them back to colour and 100%, I can do it without messing up the colour choices. Moving on to my backgrounds, I like to make these before I start any animation. This is just so I know where my character can be positioned or interact with the props within the shot. Like the colour script, I'll start out with grayscale, making sure to separate out elements into their own layers so I can have animation above and beneath certain parts like the desk, and the chair is on its own layer too so that it can be animated later as well. I often use the shape and perspective tools to help, but then trace over the edges freehand to soften some of the harder edges. After I'd finished the flat grayscale stage, I then started on adding colour, using the colour scripts as reference. Going from a small thumbnail to a larger scale background can be difficult, and in this first panel the contrast between yellow and blue was quite harsh. Later on, I ended up layering a few more colours on top to soften the edges and add a bit more depth. I then sketched out my character, this time much neater and nearer to the finished line quality than before, so I could use this as a reference later on to keep my animation more consistent. A second layer, the arm, was drawn in red to stand out against the rest of the character and background. After that, I started on lined detail to the rest of the background, using the same sized brush. With this style, I used small breaks in my outlines and shorter lines across the background to suggest texture on various surfaces. Backgrounds are something I want to get better at, and making short projects like this really helps to keep my motivation high. Finally, it was time to get started on the animation. First up was the cat sleeping beneath the window. I could have added in breaths as they slept, but I was trying not to add in too many details. This 8-second animation took 21 hours in total to complete. I used past experiences of animating a pendulum swing, which is a really useful beginner exercise to adjust the tail of this cat. I didn't want the swing to be even or swing the entire time, and adjusted my first frame to hold before the movement started. This first animation within this shot was pretty quick, so I set the layer to loop, and this meant I could easily copy it and extend it later on if I needed to. Next up was the character animation. I copied my first drawn frame across the timeline and adjusted the frames with the warp tool to create new positions. Once I was happy with the timing, I then copied more frames and created in-betweens to smooth out the movement. There's very limited amounts of movements within this first shot until the character is pulled through the screen. By copying frames, I saved more time than if I had decided to redraw every position. With the character reference on a low opacity layer beneath, I then used basic shapes to rough out the more dynamic poses of pulling back and then getting sucked into the screen. I didn't film a reference for this, but I worked out most of the expressions and recoil by acting it out myself as I went along. The timing for this movement is fairly quick, and with most animations I'll sketch out the poses before starting on the timing. With digital work, I have most of my timing plans in my head. I don't use a chart because it's really easy to adjust like this, but with traditional animation on paper I would definitely be making timing charts and planning things out beforehand. Next, I added in some spiky lines to hide any rough edges where the character is pulled through the screen. I used these later as a base for the magic effect I added. Once the roughs were finished, I decided to copy and paste my reference drawing and then use the warp tool in TVPaint to adjust the frames. This saved me redrawing it and made sure the details were more consistent in the face and shoulders. There were some points like the top of the legs that bent inward when the torso was moved, but this would have to be corrected later. As usual, I like to section out my animation into different layers to better arrange which parts are above and below areas of the background. The legs were separate so they could be positioned beneath the desk. The arm and expression of the character were on their own layers as well. In the storyboard, I'd planned to have a few smaller looping animations that would be composited in the second scene. These were super simple and fun to do, just layering up different blobs and using the stencil function to add texture with my grainy brush. Again, these were in grayscale so I could add extra colours and texture layers later on. Moving back to the main animation, it was time to line my first scene. I find this part of the process pretty soothing, though it's important to name my layers and keep them organised so the project is easier to manage. I like to colour code the layers to the character if there are plenty in the scene, or use multiple colours to show which part of the process they are, like backgrounds and textures, roughs, lines, colour, and so on. With the different parts of the character on separate layers, I had to make sure each part was closed off so I could use the CTG layer for colouring later. This speeds up the process a lot and acts much like the bucket fill tool. For the eyes, which I couldn't close off with a line, I coloured these by hand. For the magic effect, where the character is pulled into the tablet, I used a couple of layers, one over the top of the character to hide the edges, and one beneath to spread across the background layers. I then sketched out small lightning lines across my character's arm that would spread as they were pulled in. With the textured brush and the stencil function activated on the magic layers, I added in some subtle texture with a blending mode to finish it off. In scene 2, which was my favourite thing to animate, I was back to my regular animated style. My character was in the centre and I started out animating the key poses and then adding breakdowns and in-betweens to smooth it out. I dragged the frames along to time out the animation and started on the glitch frames. If you've never animated a glitch, I would highly recommend it. You can go absolutely wild with glitch frames, stretching them out using different proportions and expressions, which is why I love them. For this animation, I used 2 glitch frames and then an in-between to go between the glitch and regular pose, just to make sure that it transitions back nicely. In longer poses, I like to add in a blink to make sure that it doesn't look too still for too long. If a character does remain still for too long, even if there's stuff going on in the background or other characters are moving, it gets a bit unsettling, and the illusion that they're alive may break. Try adding in a blink or shift in pose to keep things interesting. For my recent projects, I've been really enjoying a round, no pressure brush. The one I'm using is an adjustment of my soft pencil brush, where the size and power are both set to constant, while increasing the power to 100%. For any recurring characters, I have a custom panel to save my palette, but for the glitches, I wanted each frame to have a different, more saturated scheme that would shift as it played. The way I chose the glitch palettes was to limit the palette to 4 colours that I thought looked good together. This first palette is analogous, which in simple terms means the colours appear side by side in the colour wheel. We have 2 shades of pink, a yellow for the skin and then an orange for the body. In this first glitch, I decided to keep the skin colour yellow to help link those frames together. The second frame is based on complementary colours, purple and yellow and blue and orange. It's also an even split between warm and cool colours. The third frame in this first glitch is much more subdued in the hair and boots, and is a little closer to my regular palette. The yellow skin is still there to link together the previous 2 frames, and the blue of the body is a lot brighter. In the second glitch, I chose a softer pink as the skin colour to link them all together. This first frame has a lot more pastel tones and is closer to being triadic, which is where the colours are evenly spaced around the colour wheel. The second and third frames are again much softer with their palettes. To composite the second scene, I made a new project, added a layer that lasted the duration and copied in the background layers from the original. I used the multiplane camera tool to reference the background layers and smaller animations I'd made, all split into their own projects so they could be added as individual planes and arranged in front of the camera. The camera would start out close to the character and then pull back, revealing the grey outer rings and smaller looping elements. By arranging the planes at different distances, it would give depth to the animation and allow me to fit animated loops between them. It's much easier to see where everything is placed in the stage view. It took a while to get everything just how I wanted it. I made multiple tests to check the timing and layout, and then added another multiplane camera to the FX stack for the character animation and keyframed that to reduce in size at the end of the movement. I added keyframes to the rotation and position of the smaller animated loops, scrubbing through the timeline to check what the move was like until I was happy with it. The good thing about referencing individual projects in the multiplane camera is that if you update the project, then the FX stack will reflect the changes. This helped a lot when I was adding colour to the looping animations, and I used the pencil colours and layer blending modes as reference to give them the same look. When I was finally happy with all the positions, sizes, timing, I then referenced the colour script to add texture, highlights and shadows to my scene. As I'd used a second multiplane camera to render my character glitch on a separate layer, and above the background colour and texture layers, I then went in and added smaller textured details and highlights to match the light source from behind the character. With the compositing done for scene 2, I added in some smaller looping animations to the screens in scene 1, and finished the transition animation that would creep in from the edges to fill the screen, and layered a scratchy looping texture I'd made earlier to go over the top. I had the texture play in a loop for a couple of frames before I reversed the animation on a duplicated layer and copied this to scene 2 for the reveal. Lastly, I exported my finished animation and added some sound effects. This took 35 minutes to find the clips and put it all together. I used the free version of Davinci Resolve and a few Creative Commons sound clips from freesound.org. This part was all down to personal preference. I used birdsong, thumps for the chair falling, glitch and electric sounds for added effects, and some music to help build a base for each scene. Adding in keyframes to adjust the volume of each clip and some audio transitions to fade out at the end, this is the final result. As always, I hope you found this video helpful. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell if you want to see more animations and tutorials from me, and I'll be back with another video real soon. Bye!